The world has been watching closely as the conflict between Russia and Ukraine has unfolded, with its roots deeply embedded in political, historical, and territorial disputes. While most are aware of the broader conflict, the nuances of Russia's military strategy in Ukraine may remain elusive to many. Today, we will delve deep into the key components of Russia's military approach in Ukraine, analyzing the motives behind its decisions, the methods used, and the impact on both Ukraine and the international community. The conflict has evolved since 2014, from the annexation of Crimea and the war in Donbas to the full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022. This is a multi-dimensional war, where traditional military operations are just one aspect of a broader strategy, including hybrid warfare, disinformation, and cyber attacks. Understanding Russia's objectives and how they use their military to achieve them is crucial to understanding the overall conflict. To understand Russia's military strategy in Ukraine, we must first understand the historical context. Russia's involvement in Ukraine did not start with the 2022 invasion. It can be traced back to centuries of intertwined history between the two nations. Ukraine was part of the Russian Empire for centuries, and even after the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, Russia has always seen Ukraine as part of its sphere of influence. The breakup of the Soviet Union left many Russian-speaking populations in countries like Ukraine, which has been used by the Kremlin as a justification for interference in these regions. This sentiment was echoed in Vladimir Putin's speeches, where he emphasized that Ukraine was historically part of Russia and that Ukrainians and Russians are one people. The key moment in this modern conflict came in 2014, with the Euromaidan protests and the ousting of the pro-Russian President Viktor Yanukovych. The protests called for Ukraine to align more with the European Union, which was seen as a direct threat to Russian interests. Moscow responded by annexing Crimea and supporting separatists in the Donbas region, setting the stage for the broader conflict that erupted in 2022. When Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine on February 24, 2022, it appeared to many analysts that the Kremlin expected a swift victory. The initial military strategy was likely based on the assumption that Ukraine would capitulate quickly, either due to military defeat or political collapse. Moscow had amassed hundreds of thousands of troops along Ukraine's borders, coupled with advanced air and missile capabilities, armor, and artillery. The goal seemed to be the rapid decapitation of the Ukrainian government, with a heavy emphasis on taking the capital, Kyiv. Russia's military leadership likely aimed to create shock and awe by using overwhelming force. Missile strikes hit key infrastructure, airfields, and military targets across Ukraine in the first hours of the invasion. Simultaneously, Russian forces entered Ukraine from multiple directions, attempting a pincer movement to encircle Kyiv and other major cities. However, this initial strategy encountered significant challenges. Ukrainian forces, buoyed by high morale and international support, mounted a strong defense. The Ukrainian military had been preparing for a Russian invasion for years, and their forces were highly motivated, employing Western-supplied weapons and well-honed defensive tactics. The Russian strategy of a quick political decapitation failed, and their forces were bogged down in a prolonged, grinding conflict. Russia's military strategy in Ukraine has not been limited to conventional warfare. Hybrid warfare, an approach that blends military, cyber, economic, and informational tactics, has played a crucial role in the conflict. Since the start of the war, Russia has conducted numerous cyber attacks on Ukrainian government institutions, critical infrastructure, and the media. These cyber attacks aim to destabilize Ukraine by causing panic, disrupting communications, and degrading command and control capabilities. In 2015 and 2016, Russia demonstrated its ability to launch cyber attacks by knocking out parts of Ukraine's power grid. These types of cyber activities continued into 2022, with more sophisticated attacks on Ukrainian banks and government websites in the early days of the invasion. Another major component of Russia's hybrid warfare strategy has been the information war. The Kremlin has invested heavily in propaganda and disinformation campaigns to control the narrative at home and abroad. Russian state media, like RT and Sputnik, as well as various online troll farms and bots, have been used to spread pro-Russian narratives. These efforts include justifying the invasion by accusing Ukraine of neo-Nazism, blaming NATO for provoking the conflict, and downplaying Russian military losses. This strategy extends beyond the domestic audience. Russia's disinformation campaigns target Western societies, aiming to divide public opinion, sow confusion, and undermine Western support for Ukraine. By muddying the waters with false information, Russia hopes to weaken the international coalition backing Ukraine. As the war progressed and the initial blitzkrieg-like strategy failed to achieve its objectives, Russia shifted to a strategy of attritional warfare. This is a form of conflict where both sides aim to wear each other down through sustained combat, inflicting heavy casualties, and gradually eroding the enemy's capacity to fight. After the failure to capture Kyiv, Russia focused its efforts on the eastern and southern regions of Ukraine, particularly the Donbas, where it had already been involved in supporting separatist forces. The Donbas is of strategic importance due to its industrial base and proximity to Russia. By concentrating its forces here, Russia hoped to achieve more manageable objectives, such as securing the full control of the Luhansk and Donetsk regions. The Russian military adopted more traditional artillery-heavy tactics, unleashing devastating bombardments on Ukrainian positions. Towns and cities like Mariupol, Severodonetsk, and Lysychansk were subjected to relentless shelling. This method of warfare is costly, both in terms of human lives and equipment, but it aligns with Russia's historical preference for using overwhelming firepower to grind down its enemies. Russia's shift to attritional warfare also reflects its attempt to exploit its material advantages. The Russian military still commands vast stockpiles of artillery, tanks, and armored vehicles, although Western sanctions and the ongoing conflict have increasingly limited its ability to produce new weapons. The goal of this strategy is to inflict maximum damage on Ukrainian forces, wear them down, and eventually compel them to negotiate on Russian terms. Another element of Russia's military strategy is its reliance on proxy forces and mercenaries. Since the beginning of the conflict in 2014, Russia has utilized separatist groups in the Donetsk and Luhansk regions as proxies. These groups, nominally independent but heavily supported and directed by Moscow, have been on the front lines of the fighting. They allow Russia to project power while maintaining a degree of plausible deniability, although this pretense has been largely dropped as the war has escalated. In addition to separatist forces, Russia has increasingly relied on mercenaries, particularly from the Wagner Group. Wagner, a private military company with ties to the Kremlin, has been involved in conflicts across the world, from Syria to Africa, and has played a significant role in the war in Ukraine. These mercenaries are often used for high-risk operations, particularly in urban combat and special operations. Their involvement allows Russia to supplement its regular military forces without officially acknowledging the extent of its human losses. The use of these proxy forces also provides a strategic advantage in that it allows Russia to shift some of the burden of fighting away from its conventional forces, which have already suffered significant casualties. Furthermore, by using mercenaries and separatist fighters, Russia can extend its operations without the same level of political scrutiny or backlash that might come from deploying additional regular army units. Russia's military strategy also incorporates elements of economic warfare, using energy resources and trade to exert pressure on Ukraine and its Western allies. Ukraine's energy infrastructure has been a target of Russian attacks throughout the war. Destroying power plants, fuel depots, and transmission lines has been a key part of Russia's attempt to cripple Ukraine's ability to sustain itself militarily and economically. The control of energy supplies has also been used as leverage against European countries, many of which are heavily reliant on Russian natural gas. By reducing gas exports or threatening to cut off supplies altogether, Russia has attempted to weaken European resolve and fracture the unity of the European Union. The 2022 energy crisis, exacerbated by the war, demonstrated the extent of Russia's influence over global energy markets. Russia's control of key natural resources has also played into its military strategy in Ukraine. By seizing important industrial and agricultural regions, particularly in the south and east of Ukraine, Russia hopes to deprive Ukraine of crucial economic assets. The grain-producing regions of Ukraine, for example, are critical to the global food supply, and Russia's control or disruption of these regions has had far-reaching implications beyond the battlefield. One of the most significant factors in Russia's military strategy is the implicit threat of nuclear escalation. Since the early days of the war, Russia has made veiled nuclear threats, warning NATO and the West not to intervene directly in Ukraine. By brandishing its nuclear arsenal, Russia seeks to deter the United States and European countries from becoming more involved militarily in the conflict. This nuclear deterrence is a core part of Russia's overall military doctrine, which emphasizes the use of nuclear weapons as a last resort but also as a tool of intimidation. Although the likelihood of actual nuclear use remains low, the mere possibility creates a psychological advantage for Russia. It forces NATO to carefully calibrate its support for Ukraine, avoiding actions that could be interpreted as direct involvement in the war. The international response, particularly from the West, has played a critical role in shaping the trajectory of the conflict and Russia's military strategy. While Russia hoped to swiftly overwhelm Ukraine, the flow of Western military aid, especially in the form of advanced weaponry like Javelin anti-tank missiles, HIMARS rocket systems, and air defense systems, has significantly bolstered Ukraine's ability to resist. Western sanctions have also been a key part of the international response, targeting Russian industries, banks, and oligarchs, seeking to cripple the Russian economy and limit its ability to fund the war. However, Russia has shown resilience in the face of these sanctions, finding ways to mitigate their impact, particularly by forging stronger economic ties with countries like China and India. Russia's military strategy in Ukraine is a complex and multifaceted approach that combines traditional military operations with hybrid warfare, economic leverage, and the threat of nuclear escalation. While the conflict has not gone as Moscow originally planned, Russia has shown a willingness to adapt its strategy to the changing conditions on the ground. Ultimately, the war in Ukraine is a war of attrition, with no easy or quick resolution in sight. As both Ukraine and Russia continue to fight for control, the conflict will likely have far-reaching consequences not only for these two nations but for the broader international order. Understanding Russia's strategy is key to understanding how this conflict might evolve and what it could mean for global security in the years to come.